Good evening, everyone. I'm glad to see so many of my neighbors out with us to discuss a topic that is very important to us all. I ask that at the beginning, as we start, that we'd all stand to say the Pledge of Allegiance together. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So we've come together tonight to talk about the traffic camera program here in Maple Heights. And I prayed that tonight would be informative, that it would be beneficial, and that it would be civil. Because I know that it is something that we have some passions about. So I'd ask at the beginning that we would be sure that we're treating each other as the good neighbors that we know that we are. Getting started with an introduction, we have index cards you probably noticed on your way in. I've already got a handful here. If you want to fill one out with a question that you don't hear asked tonight, then please do. Phyllis is in the back. She'll collect it for you, and she'll bring it up to us to be asked later on in the meeting. There are also handouts that you should have received from Phyllis. She's doing such a wonderful job back there. So make sure you have one of those. It has some information on the flip side, on the rear, that with some links, some more information about the traffic camera and the frequently asked questions. And also, please feel free, if you have a phone call, to take it outside. If you need to use the restroom, please, no one's gonna mind. No one's gonna mind. You can go right on ahead. Andy, where are your restrooms, so everyone knows?
Right out the door, to your left.
Out the door and to the left, once you leave the room, okay? Or the restrooms, in case you need them. So our agenda. You're probably aware that I have been collecting questions from residents, from our neighbors, about the traffic camera program. They've been submitted mostly through email, but some through conversations that I've had while I was handing out my flyers. And so I've compiled them. We have a list of about 20 questions that we're going to go through from these submitted questions. And then after that, we'll go through the ones that have been given to us on the index cards. And then finally, we'll move into questions from the audience. So if you have a question that comes up while we're talking, take note, write it down, and just remember it so that you can ask it at the end, at the time for the audience, and you'll come up front to the microphone and be able to ask your questions one at a time. So our questions that we're going to start with have 6 categories. I kind of compiled them to help us think through them together. First is the contract. How are things going to work with Optotraffic? Secondly, people are wondering about the locations, why they are the places they are, why maybe they're so close, or why they're only in a certain part of the city. And then we're going to cover the citations themselves, kind of how they will work, what caused you to receive one of them. And then, one that there's been a lot of questions about is notification. There have been a lot of questions about how people were notified, what were the requirements, whether they were met. And then the last 2 are the impact. We're going to see how it impacts the city, starting it and in the future. And then finally, legal issues. That's one that people outside of Maple Heights are asking right now. What is the legal issues relating to traffic cameras? So let's go ahead and get started with our locations. Our first question is, how were the locations picked for these cameras? I want to give this to you, Chief Popielarczyk. Oh, forgive me, I didn't introduce everyone. This is Chief John Popielarczyk. He is our police chief, has been the police chief since May of this year, and he's done a wonderful job. I have nothing but good things to say about him. And sitting across from him is Mayor Trevor Elkins from Newburgh Heights. He's on this panel this evening because of his intimate knowledge of how the program works with Optotraffic, since his village has been operating with Optotraffic, doing the same thing we're doing for about a year now. So he can speak with personal insight as to how things work. So to get started, how are the locations picked for the cameras, Chief?
Thank you, Mr. Brownlee. First, thank you to everyone here for attending tonight. The answer to that question is really quite simple. The enforcement locations were selected because traditionally, in the 24 years that I've been here as a member of the police department, we've experienced the highest number of speed violations and traffic violations there. When we conduct routine enforcement in the marked patrol units, those areas where these cameras are were areas that we always sat, and where we've sat since as long as I've been here, and where we've always had a problem with a large number of citations been issued for speeding violations. There was no other criteria for it other than that. When Optotraffic came to us with suggestions in terms of sites, those were the two, and I selected them, that came to mind immediately. As far as the actual locations themselves for the cameras, and maybe I'm jumping ahead here, but some of it has to do with why are cameras right across from each other. Some of that has to do with the cameras themselves in terms of where they can actually physically be situated on a roadway. But the reason for the sites was simply that those are high traffic areas with a high number of violations. Additionally, so we're aware, and since I'm sure it'll come up, with school coming up here in the next few weeks, there are going to be additional cameras added in the school zones on Dunham Road and on Lee Road near the police department. You'll receive notification, you can check the website, and they'll be on there for that. I'll make announcements at the council meeting. I don't have a set date right now for those cameras, but I'm just letting you know, since you're here at this meeting, that they will be coming. That was part of when we had talked about this initially, that's what we intended to do. Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Mayor, did you have any comments on how you selected them in your city?
We selected them in a very similar fashion. The areas where we had the highest volume of speeding situations issued by manual enforcement. So
They're very much the same.
Correct. And then as well as the school zone as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Our second question is regarding locations. Why were the cameras not spread out, as you started to answer, Chief? Why are the cameras not more spread out, and why are there two cameras seemingly right next to each other? Would you address that, Chief?
Certainly. Again, some as far as the placement of the cameras has to do with finding a location that's physically capable of placement. In terms of the cameras being across the road from each other, it really doesn't make a difference. What those are measuring is each camera measures a different lane of traffic, in other words, northbound or southbound. So the cameras on one side of the road measure a northbound traffic, the cameras on the other side of the road measure southbound traffic. The ones on Broadway are spread out slightly more, but again, that simply had to do with the physical requirements for setting up the camera itself. It had nothing to do with anything but that.
Yes, I spoke with our Optotraffic representative this morning, and he said just what the chief said, that each camera, each device can measure 2 lanes of traffic. So if there's 4 lanes, like there is on Broadway in Lawrenceville, you need to have 2 cameras to monitor all 4 lanes. So that's why there appears to be too many cameras maybe in one spot, but there is just the right amount to monitor each lane of traffic. Thirdly, we have under locations, why are all the cameras on the east side of Maple? That's come up actually an awful lot in conversations that I have. How come they're all on the east side? There's none on the west side. Chief, would you like to comment?
Sure. When we instituted this program, we were not sure at all what we were going to be dealing with in terms of the volume of violations, what we were going to be looking at in terms of a department, in terms of handling what we were going to get. Again, these 2 locations were picked simply because they were traditional enforcement areas, and it had nothing to do with whether the east or west side. The west side will get its camera when Dunham Road school zone goes into effect. There's been talk of Rockside as well, but it's just simply a matter of just the locations where violations occurred and nothing more.
Will there be any cameras other than Dunham Road, do you think, in the future appearing on the west side, perhaps on Rockside Road? That's been a question as well.
They can, and I can assure you that that is a location. We actually have additional sites mapped out with Optotraffic, Rockside Road being one of them, Libby Road, places, because again, Rockside is another place where we have a large volume of violations, and again, a traditional enforcement area. When we started the program, we only wanted to pick 2 locations. Those are the 2 locations that we picked. Now, Having said that, I'm not sure, again, with Mr. Brownlee, when we agreed to do these, we agreed to place them in at a limited basis. In other words, we were just going to have these 2 sites and then the school zones, and then see how the program worked out towards the end of the year, or whether it would even still be in effect at that time. So from my perspective, that's still my intent. For the remainder of this year, I can tell you that other than the school zone cameras, we won't be placing anything else, any other cameras anywhere else.
Thank you, Chief. You mentioned these are traditional sites. So Warrensville and Broadway, you were already, if you were to send out a police officer to monitor traffic, those were the same locations you would have sent them to previously?
Yes.
The joy of too few microphones. Mayor Elkins, there was something that I picked up on. Hey, that's a good idea, man. You were thinking, man. So one thing I picked up on that the chief said was a limited basis. We're going to start out with just a couple of cameras, see how things go. Is that similar to what happened in Newburgh Heights?
That is correct. Can you hear me? So I won't use my phone. We have enough that. So that's correct. The intent was to place them on Harvard, the 52nd block of Harvard Avenue. Put that in operation for a period of 90 days. If, as we ironed out whatever issues that may occur, notification process, that kind of thing, and then add the cameras to the school. So we're following essentially, you're following essentially the same platform that we followed.
Our next question is, are the locations listed anywhere? So where are the locations listed that people can find?
Yeah, that's a question that's come up. I've actually given that information to some of the council people. I know that it's on the Maple Heights news site now. Other than that, they're not listed anywhere that I'm aware of. I don't believe that they're listed on the city site. I made the announcement at the July 16th council meeting specifically in terms of where they were going to be placed. I don't know if the neighborhood news picked that up in their article. Obviously, you listed it on your website for that. So those would be the only places that they would be listed that I am aware of.
So one of the things that the Village of Newburgh Heights has done is every time a camera has moved, we've run a small public notice, 4 inches by 4 inches, something like that, in the neighborhood news. So we take out an ad and say, this is where the camera is now located.
Very good. So the last question on locations is another one I've gotten a lot of. In fact, I got these questions prior to even having traffic cameras up. In the locations on Broadway and Warrensville, the speed limit is only 25 miles an hour. So a lot of people have asked, why is the speed limit only 25 on a road that it seems like maybe it should be higher?
The speed limits on those roads, on all roads actually in the state of Ohio, are set by state ordinance, under the Ohio Revised Code. 4511.21 speed limits an assured clear distance. If you look at a copy of that ordinance either on the web or if you haven't obtained a book, it states specifically that the speed limits in those, what speed limits are required in certain areas of each municipality in each city. So our speed limits within the city simply follow the requirements of the state ordinance.
So, Chief, the city is not actually in a position to change the speed limits?
Not that I'm aware of. It's pretty specific in the ordinance, in the ordinances in terms of a business district, which is that's considered because it has 300 feet of business space, continuous, and that would be a 25 miles per hour zone.
Okay. So all this has come right out of the ORC, you said?
Correct. 4511.21, speed limits and assured clear distance.
Okay. So those are all the questions on the locations. The next section is citations, how the citations work, what you do if you receive one, what causes you to receive one. And the first question starts with that. What is the maximum speed you can go without getting a ticket? There's been rumors that people have received tickets for 27 miles per hour in the 25 zone. Chief, what are your thoughts on that?
My initial thought on that is what is the maximum speed you can get without getting a ticket? What is the speed limit? It's 25 miles an hour. That's the speed that we're supposed to be driving. Realistically, though, that's not the answer, okay? We have said, and we agreed on this when this started, that we would not issue any citations to anyone unless they were going 11 miles an hour over the speed limit. Okay, I can tell you that the officers that are reviewing these citations are following that protocol. I myself have caught quite a bit of heat in regards to that, because if you read the ordinance, it says anything over 10. We had agreed, and when we met with council, all the members of council, when we discussed this matter, when we were vetting the program, it was decided at that point that that was the threshold that we were going to use, and that is the threshold that we use. If, in fact, someone did get a citation for 27 miles per hour, I would like to see it, because I have not been made aware of this, and I haven't gotten the citation, but there would be a flaw in the program then, because that's not how it works. I've done some of the approvals myself. I see how it works. It's pretty clear and it's pretty specific, and I don't really have an answer as to that 27 and a 25 question.
So no one should be receiving a ticket for 2 miles an hour over?
Absolutely not.
Should be
11 miles per hour is the threshold.
Mm-hmm. Mayor, have you had any trouble with this in your year of experience with Optotraffic?
We have not. Our threshold is actually 10 miles per hour, so at 35 miles per hour, a citation is issued. And in the school zone, it's 8 miles per hour. So if the school lights are flashing, speed limit is 20, you're speeding at 28, you'll get a citation. We have not had a problem with people going less than that threshold that receives citation.
Did you want to comment?
In light of the fact that the mayor brought the school zone issue, just so you are aware, we will be enforcing the school zones at 6 miles an hour. That was decided by the ordinance, that was agreed upon by all. The reason is simply because that's fast enough in a school zone with our children going to school. At least that's the feeling of myself and the members of City Council who decided on that. So just so you understand that we will be enforcing at 6 miles per hour when the school zone cameras take effect.
I know that's a concern that people often have about traffic cameras. Are they making the threshold so low that it's, well, kind of ridiculous? You know, 1 mile an hour or 2 mile an hour over. We don't want something like that. And I know that whenever we were considering this ordinance, which actually the chief has a copy right here, it's 2014-43. It's also available on Maple Heights News if you would like to see this for yourself. It sets forth all the requirements for the traffic program. And two of the pieces were, what speed does someone have to be going to receive a ticket in a regular zone, and then how fast does someone need to be going in a school zone to receive a ticket. Whenever we decided to set it at 11 mile an hour over the speed limit in a regular zone, I thought that sounded more than gracious. It sounded like a good limit, a good threshold to operate our program at. And that was part of the reason I support it, because I think with these programs, it's more how you run it than what it is. It's not so much just cameras are bad, but cameras are often misused. And if we were doing something where we were ticketing people for 3, 4, 5 mile an hour over, I'm sure most of us would have a different view on this. We would say that's probably not reasonable. So I'm glad that we've set it as high as we have. Mayor?
To touch base on that issue and where the 10 mile per hour limit in the ordinance came from, because your ordinance is very similar to ours. That number came from something that's called the best practices legislation that's in Columbus today that would make these cameras, it would lay out a statewide process for use of the cameras. And that number was deemed a reasonable speed limit by the state legislature. So it's now been in several pieces of legislation at the state and the state senate.
Thanks, Mayor. So our second question is talking about appealing. That's a hot button issue throughout the state, is how do you appeal these things? Is it possible to appeal it? What provisions are there for someone to say, that's not me, or that's not my car, or there's just something wrong with this. I don't believe that I actually was traveling this speed at this time in this area. So, Chief, would you be able to comment on, can these be appealed? What does someone do if they think that the violation is an error?
First, let me address this by what not to do. And that would be to call my secretary and yell at her, because unfortunately for her, that's been the case a number of times. No, there is an appeal process for that, and if you were to receive one of these citations, it details it for you. On the second page of it, on the second page of the citation, there's an affidavit that you can fill out and mail back in to the company or to the address and to request a hearing date. And that is the appeal process. There's apparently too, there's some confusion in terms of whether or not the appeal process, and what happens with that. Once you send that in, they set a hearing date for you to come in to make your case. You know, whether you weren't the one in the car, it's not your car, your license plates were stolen, the vehicle was stolen, etc. There are 3 things listed specifically, but obviously in a hearing you can bring forth any arguments that you think are valid. As far as there's a fee listed on the citation itself, $25 fee to appeal. On the citation, the way that that's listed is you only pay that $25 fee if in fact your appeal is unsuccessful. So I wanted to clarify that. But the appeal process is outlined on the citations. There is an appeal process. You just have to request a hearing. That's all you need to do if you've got a citation and you want to contest it.
Mayor Elkins, what has been your experience with people in your city or village requesting an appeal?
We have had a number of appeals, and I think we do appeal hearings every couple of weeks. Sometimes we'll have as many as 60, sometimes we'll have as few as 10. They go before the magistrate, they will express, hey, that wasn't me in that car, at which point they have the ability or the right to what's called assigned liability. And if they're able to prove, let's say it was a company truck, and they're able to prove who it was, which driver it was, they can have the liability for that citation assigned to that driver, not, say, the corporation. So there is an appeals process. We don't have the $25 fee. We completely removed that from our legislation because it did cause some confusion, as the chief noted. And we wanted people to have the full right and ability to have their case heard before a magistrate. It is a civil citation and not a criminal citation, and this is a very important distinction, and I know they're probably going to get into this legal issue, but why it's important is because the officer approving the citation or the chief will be there at the hearing. They will outline the evidence, and because it's civil, they don't need to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you were guilty. They only need to prove the preponderance of the evidence, and that's 51% of the proof. You have 3 photos of your vehicle. If there's another vehicle in the picture, that's a reasonable explanation to give to the magistrate to say, hey, maybe this was the other car impacting my speed. The magistrate may say yes, they may say no, but that's additional evidence that you may have. So I have found, and I've said it on many of these hearings, when we started the program, that the magistrate is responsible for being no different than it would if you went in front of the magistrate or a judge in Garfield Court.
So have there been any complications in the process?
Well, there's been some issues as it relates to decisions made by the 8th District and the 6th District Court of Appeals in Toledo, the 8th District Court here in Cleveland, as to the legality of the hearing, and I think that we're probably going to get into that later, the adjudication process. So there's been some challenges there. There's also been some challenges when individuals will come in front of the magistrate and they still say, listen, I'm not guilty, I'm not paying, and they want to go to Garfield Court. That process is still being worked out. In fact, we just met with the Garfield judges this week, and we expect in the next 30 days there'll be an administrative process in Garfield Court where all of these will start going to Garfield if they're appealed beyond the local court process.
I just wanted to add 2 things. One, I personally attended one of the Newburgh Heights hearings, and today our Assistant Law Director Blair Melling, along with our Clerk of Courts Brevin Williams, attended another hearing today. We will be modeling our hearings after the Newburgh Heights court system and with what they're doing. So there will be some, what the mayor described to you will be very similar to what you would experience if you did go to a hearing in our city. Additionally, I just wanted to point out that if you have questions regarding your citation, there is a number located on the bottom right-hand corner of it. It's a 1-800 number, 888-944-6446. I would encourage you to call that number to ask any questions you may have regarding how to handle the citation. I know myself personally, I've met a few people at the door coming to our clerk's office trying to pay them, asking questions about them. Unfortunately, that's not the way that we can do. We cannot take the payments there. They have to be mailed in. And if you have questions about that, that number can give you any guidance or direction that you have regarding what's on that citation.
Thank you, Chief. The next question we have regarding citations is, actually we began to touch on it when we mentioned that these are civil offenses, not criminal. But the question is, will I get points on my license? Like if I were pulled over by a police officer with radar, is it work the same way where I'll receive a certain number of points on my license? Chief?
Short answer to that is no. As the mayor pointed out, it is a civil violation. It does not get reported to your insurance company. It does not. You do not receive points on your license. It's that simple. I mean, if you still have the hearing, as the mayor pointed out, because it's a civil case, it's a different standard of law, as opposed to beyond a reasonable doubt. It's just preponderance of evidence. But there are no points on your license, and nobody's going to report anything to any other outside agency.
The closest legal citation that you might receive that would be similar to a traffic camera violation is a parking ticket. So if you get a parking ticket, it's not considered a criminal citation. It's considered a civil citation. So at some point, if you fail to pay your, well, let me rephrase this. In Newburgh Heights, if you fail to pay your traffic camera citation, at some point you will eventually find that your driver's license and your license plates have been blocked until you pay that violation. You will not be able to renew your driver's license, you will not be able to re-register your vehicle until you pay that violation. Just like with a parking ticket.
I'm glad you explained that because I've never had a parking ticket. So that's what happens if you have a parking ticket. Okay. You don't pay a parking, so make sure you pay your parking tickets. This next question is one I think everyone's thought, but I've only had one person ask me. I can see why no one's asked me, but everyone's thinking it. Do the citations need to be paid? What will happen if I don't pay the citation? We began to talk about that. But Chief, could you comment on this briefly?
I will. Obviously, the mayor answered that in part already. He explained the sanctions that would occur if, in fact, you refuse to pay. There's also an increase in the fines if you don't pay, and it's outlined in the ordinance in terms of what those are. I believe they increase to like $125 and up to $180, depending on the time frame. However, you won't be arrested. However, the other sanctions that the mayor outlined would also be imposed upon you in addition to the fines. You could also be taken to collections for failing to pay the debt.
And let's follow up with that, Chief. How much is the citation, and what are the penalties if they aren't paid?
Well, again, the mayor outlined what the penalties would be in terms of outside of the monetary fines. The initial traffic camera fee is $100. I believe it's if you pay within 30 days. And you'll have to excuse me, but I don't have it in front of me specifically. I know it jumps then, I believe, to $125 and then $180. I'm not sure the time, but I want to say it's like 45 or 60, and then at 90 days it goes up. And we probably have it sitting here in front of us. But in any case, the idea is to get you to pay immediately so that the fines don't increase.
Mayor, did you have a comment?
I did. The process that will occur once these go to, if you were to get a camera citation and you chose to ignore it, and the village, or in your case the city of Newburgh Heights, decided it was going to process these in regard to the court, what would happen is, because it's a civil citation, a default judgment would be placed against you in civil court if you don't appear for not paying the fine. At that point, it does have a negative impact on you because the courts are monitored by the three major credit bureaus: TransUnion, Experian, and Equifax. So if you go to borrow and buy a car, for example, or buy a house, or just get a loan for whatever you might need to get a loan, and you haven't paid your camera citation, it's gone through Garfield Court, they've placed a judgment on you for that, a couple of things can happen. The city of Maple Heights or the village of Newburgh Heights, for example, can engage in collections through, I think, your regional income tax agency. So they can engage in collections through your taxes. They can engage in garnishments. There's a number of different things. But in all likelihood, what's going to happen is these credit bureaus are going to pick up this default judgment on and place it on your credit report. And that's done. The cities aren't doing that. That's something that the credit bureaus monitor through your Social Security number.
Thank you, Mayor. I wasn't aware of those things. Chief, did you have some comments?
I just want to clarify, since we asked you, because I pulled out the civil penalties for it. If the civil penalty, which is what they're talking about, is your citation, and actually they call it a liability. If the civil penalty is paid within 30 calendar days of the date of the issuance of the notice of liability, it's $100. If the civil penalty is paid more than 30 calendar days, but within 45 days, then it jumps to $125. And if it's paid more than 45 days after the date of issuance, then it jumps to $180. I just want to be clear and make sure that we're upfront in terms of exactly what those fees would be.
Thanks for clearing that up, Chief. The next question, the last question about the citations is, what is the distance to or from the cameras that they snap the picture? I think what this person was looking for is, what all do these cameras monitor? Are they watching the whole street, you know, out 400 feet, 500 feet? What all are they watching beyond just snapping a couple pictures of your car?
Yes, for 10 miles they watch the street.
I don't really, it's not for 10 miles, it is within a limited distance, and I apologize, I do not, when I looked at that question, I didn't really understand it, so I don't really have it. What I can tell you in terms of a very basic description of how this LiDAR works is you're breaking basically two beams of light. And when you break it, it measures the distance between when you broke those beams, and that's what records the speed. And look, I'm not an expert in this, but I'm giving you a very basic layman's explanation of what it is, and that's how it's a speed measuring device, and that's how it works. I'd hope that perhaps somebody from Optotraffic may have been here today to explain it much better than I can, because they are the experts in it. But my understanding of it in layman's terms, it does not, unfortunately, as the mayor points out, it does not go 10 miles, and it does not cover the entire roadway. It covers a specific limited distance.
You have to forgive our representative from Optotraffic. He couldn't make it, but he had a very good reason. He's recovering from surgery, so that's why he's not able to be here with us tonight. So I'm sure we can forgive him for that. That's partly why I was glad to have Mayor Elkins with us, because he's very knowledgeable on this. Another question on this, along these same lines, is something that was very interesting, that I found very interesting, as well I think all the council members, whenever the Optotraffic representative was sharing with us the first presentation about the cameras, how they work, he mentioned that they can be used for, the police can use them in investigations at times. Would you explain how that would work, Chief?
Certainly. Obviously, as you go through this device is, in addition to measuring your speed, it's taking photos. Where this is becoming helpful to law enforcement is because the way that the program is set up, on a citation, or when a citation is, it gives a specific date and time that these photos occur. Let's say, for example, that you have somebody speeding from the scene of a robbery, a homicide, or something else, and they happen to cross the path of one of these cameras. Those photos would then be taken of them, obviously, as they go past, or in the event that they weren't speeding, but perhaps someone was speeding around the same time that they were and their vehicle was in the picture, those pictures could then be made available to law enforcement through Optotraffic in order to obtain some really critical information. Vehicle description, license plate information, something that may be used then in order to help us identify the suspect. So from that extent, in addition to the traffic enforcement issues that they address, they become a valuable investigative tool then for law enforcement as well.
One of the concerns that I had going into this with Optotraffic, I asked, you know, how long do you keep these images? How long do you store this information? because, with the advancement of technology, we're all becoming more concerned about who's watching us and when, and how long are they keeping this information. Sometimes that can be a concern. So I asked, whenever the representative was here, how long they can keep them. And he informed us that Optotraffic, like many other companies, is regulated by the federal government with regards to privacy laws. So they can only keep them for a certain amount of time. And he said, to be honest, it would take up tons and tons of server space to just permanently keep all of this information. So that was something that was addressed by our representative whenever he was here. And I thought if that was important to you, that I would share that. Now, we missed a couple of questions. They weren't on my... Yes, go ahead, Mayor.
We had a similar series of questions that came up regarding the time frames, and this is more a recommendation to council and your fiscal officer. You should keep these for 3 years. Insist on the track, because what happens is every community, every city is audited every year, and this becomes revenue, and it has to be able to be verified. So most is technically a public record. So in order for it to be, most public records have to be maintained for a certain period of time, usually for a year after they've been audited. So.
Thank you, Mayor, for that insight.